Clara Winters pulled her shawl tighter as she walked along Ash Hollow Road, the winter wind slicing across the open plains. Snow drifted down in soft, fluttering sheets, dusting her worn skirt and the cracked leather of her boots. She kept her eyes on the old cottonwood tree ahead, the one folks around Copperbend called the Whisper Tree. Its branches creaked and murmured when the wind blew, as if it spoke in a language only the lonely understood. In her gloved hand, she held a small folded paper. The edges were smudged with the faint marks of her cold fingers. She had written the letter the night before, when the boarding house had grown so cold she could see her breath in the darkness and her stomach twisted with hunger. Her Christmas list. It wasn't filled with childish dreams or grand wishes, just the simplest things she longed for but could never afford. A warm blanket, boots without holes, a new gown so she could feel pretty for once, a decent meal, just one, beside a warm hearth. At the bottom, almost as an afterthought, she had scribbled one more line. "Please let me get through this winter." Clara knelt at the base of the Whisper Tree. Snowflakes settled in her dark hair as she tucked the folded note beneath a stone among the gnarled roots. Dozens of letters had been left here over the years. Children wrote to Santa Claus, travelers left prayers, widows wrote letters to the husbands they'd lost. Once the heavy snows came, the wind stole the wishes away. Clara knew it was foolish, but still she whispered, "If Christmas magic is real, please help me." She lingered a moment, pressing her hand to the cold stone covering the paper, then rose and headed back toward the dim glow of town. Behind her, unseen, a lone rider sat motionless on his horse, watching. Wyatt Hale drew his horse to a halt, his breath visible in the icy air. He watched Clara's small figure retreat along the road, her thin shawl whipping around her shoulders as the wind pushed against her back. The shawl was far too thin for a winter like this. The boots barely held together. She walked like someone who carried more than just the weight of snow. He should have ridden on. He told himself that. He had a reputation to protect, one built on distance, silence, and the hard lines of a man who owned more land than anyone in Copperbend. Wyatt Hale, the rich one. Wyatt Hale, the man who didn't share his heart or his money. Wyatt Hale, the cold rancher. That was what the town said. They didn't know him, not truly. Clara Winters, of all people, certainly didn't know the truth. But he remembered her. She had stood beside his mother's bedside last winter, tending the feverish and the dying with gentle hands and soft words. Clara had been exhausted, hungry, and poorly dressed even back then, but she had stayed until the end. His mother had squeezed Clara's hand, whispering, "She has a rare soul, why?" He never forgot that, or the girl who had no one to care for, yet still cared for others. Wyatt dismounted and approached the Whisper Tree. The folded note nestled beneath the stone caught his eye. Curiosity tugged at him, not the cruel kind, the aching, human kind. He knelt, picked up and unfolded the paper. As he read, the cold wind stopped mattering. A blanket, boots, one meal, a gown, a hope to survive winter. It wasn't greed, it wasn't selfishness, it was survival. It was quiet hope scribbled by tired hands. Wyatt closed his eyes briefly, the ache in his chest almost startling. He refolded the note and slipped it into his coat. Softly, almost to himself, he murmured, "I'll get you every one of these, Clara, and more." Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because she deserved gentleness in a world that had given her so little, and because something in him longed to give it. The next morning, Clara hurried along the wooden boardwalk of Copper Bend, her breath forming small puffs of white in the cold. The town was lively with Christmas preparation. Garlands hung on windows, lanterns glowed warm and golden, and children skipped through snowdrifts with red scarves trailing behind them. Clara clutched a basket of laundry she was delivering to Mrs. Calloway. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, and she silently prayed she could stretch her wages far enough to buy bread before nightfall. As she passed the sheriff's office, two women paused mid-conversation. "That girl works too hard. Or not enough, depending on who you ask. She's a sweet thing, though," the other replied. The first woman leaned closer. "Did you hear she cared for Wyatt Hale's mother when she was dying? Folks say he paid her well, yet look at her, still struggling. Maybe she wasted it." Clara's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She lowered her eyes and kept walking. Wyatt Hale. People were always talking about him, and always wrongly. She saw him only from a distance, tall, broad-shouldered, with the quiet, almost haunted look sometimes. A man built from hard work, long days, and longer silences. People assumed wealth made a man unfeeling. Clara wasn't sure. She remembered the way he held his mother's hand when she passed. She remembered his grief. A cold man wouldn't have cried the way he had. Wyatt's plan. Wyatt sat alone at his desk, the folded note spread out in front of him. Outside, snow fell in thick flakes, tapping softly against the windows. The large ranch house felt too big, too quiet without his mother's laughter filling its halls. His gaze drifted over the list again. He could buy everything on it 100 times over. But that wasn't how you gave gifts to someone like Clara Winters. Clara was proud, independent, too kind-hearted to accept charity. If he offered everything outright, she'd refuse. He knew that much. So he decided on something else. He would give her small miracles, not all at once, not with any signature, just quiet joy left in her path, the way real Christmas magic should be. He folded the list, slipped it into his coat, and stood. "Let me do this right," he murmured. He saddled his horse and rode into the falling snow. The first gift. Clara stepped out of the general store with a small bag of flour in her arms. Snow swirled around her, settling in her hair as she walked toward the boarding house. When she rounded the corner, her steps faltered. Wyatt Hale's chestnut stallion stood tied to the railing, and beside it, the man himself, tall, rugged, with snow dusting the shoulders of his dark coat. He was speaking quietly to Mrs. Calloway. Clara considered turning back, but then Wyatt turned and saw her. Their eyes met. He inclined his head. "Miss Winters." "Mr. Hale," she answered softly. For a moment, neither spoke. Snow fell gently between them. Then Wyatt gestured to the steps. "Seems you have a package." Clara blinked. On the wooden step sat a neatly wrapped parcel tied with twine. She picked it up, frowning in confusion. "For me?" He shrugged lightly. "Someone left it here. Maybe Santa came early." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "I doubt that, Mr. Hale." "You never know," he said gently. "Christmas is full of surprises." Clara slowly untied the twine and folded back the paper. A warm, thick, forest green wool blanket lay inside. Her breath caught. It was the finest blanket she had ever touched. She looked up sharply, but Wyatt had already stepped back. "Stay warm, Miss Winters," he said, touching the brim of his hat. Before she could speak, he mounted his horse and rode into the curtain of falling snow. Clara clutched the blanket to her chest, heart pounding. No one knew about her list. No one but the Whisper Tree, and maybe one other person. Her gaze drifted to the snowy road where Wyatt had disappeared. A Christmas miracle. She wasn't sure she deserved one, but she held it close anyway. Clara laid the green wool blanket across her narrow bed, smoothing her hand over its surface just to convince herself it was real. It was the warmest item she owned by far, and for the first time that winter, her room held a hint of comfort. She should have felt grateful. She did. But she also felt unsettled. Who had given it to her? Mrs. Calloway had no idea. No neighbor would have left such a thing, and few people in Copperbend thought of Clara long enough to give her a second glance, let alone an expensive blanket. Except one man. But no, that was impossible. Wyatt Hale didn't involve himself in the lives of townspeople. Everyone said so. Everyone whispered about him, judged him, misunderstood him. But the gift had appeared right after he'd spoken to her, right where he'd been standing. And he'd looked at her with a softness she did not understand. Clara tried pushing the thought out of her head. Men like him didn't think about women like her. She blew out the candle beside her bed and curled beneath the new blanket, the rich, warm wool enveloping her like a promise. For the first time in weeks, she slept without shivering.
Wyatt's second gift stood inside the general store, leaning against the counter while Mr. Randall boxed up a pair of sturdy leather boots lined with rabbit fur. Wyatt insisted on the warmest pair in the store. "Buying Christmas gifts?" the shopkeeper asked, raising a brow. Wyatt rarely bought anything personally. His ranch hands usually handled errands, so the sight of him there drew attention. Wyatt's expression remained unreadable. Something like that. Randall tied the box with twine. "Whoever she is, she's a lucky lady." Wyatt paused before answering, his voice quiet but firm. "She won't see it that way." Randall chuckled. "Oh, a troublesome one." Wyatt didn't smile. A proud one. He paid and left without another word. He rode toward the boarding house after nightfall, snow crunching beneath his stallion's hooves. The town was mostly dark, except for lantern lights and the gentle glow of Christmas decorations. He approached the front steps, set the box against the door, and slipped away before anyone spotted him. Just like the first gift. Just like the next few he had planned. He wanted to give her warmth without asking anything in return, and without making her uncomfortable or indebted. Wyatt rode into the night, unaware that Clara had noticed him more than he realized. A pair of boots and a blush. The next morning, Clara opened the door to fetch water from the pump and nearly tripped over the box on the step. She froze, heart pounding. The wrapping was nearly identical to the blanket packaging. Hands trembling, she knelt and lifted the box into her arms. Mrs. Calloway peeked over her shoulder. "What's that, dear?" I'm not sure." Mrs. Calloway raised her brows. "You've got a secret admirer." Clara's cheeks warmed. "No, ma'am. That's not possible." Inside her room, she sat on her bed and pulled the twine free. The lid came off easily. Her breath left her in a single, stunned exhale. Boots. Beautiful winter boots. Ones she never could have dreamed of owning. She brushed her fingers along the fur lining, feeling the softness, the warmth. It was the second wish from her list. Her eyes widened. The list. Oh, heavens! Someone had it. Someone was reading her wishes and granting them. And there was only one person who could have known she went to the Whisper Tree. Who had been there at the right time, who had looked at her as if he knew more than she said aloud. Wyatt Hale. But why would a man like him care about her? Clara sank onto the edge of her bed, clutching the boots to her chest.
Was it pity? Or something else? She didn't know which possibility scared her more.
By late afternoon, Clara wore the boots while fetching water from the well outside the church. The warmth around her feet felt heavenly, and each step was cushioned in soft fur. However, it didn't take long for gossip to start. 3 women carrying baskets slowed when they saw her. "My, Clara," one said, eyes narrowing. "Those are fine boots." "Too fine," another added. A third crossed her arms. "Must be nice having a benefactor." Clara flushed, gripping the bucket tighter. I saved for them." The first woman snorted. "Saved? With what wages?" Before Clara could respond, Sheriff Densmore strolled by and chuckled. "Leave the girl alone. Maybe Santa decided she deserved something nice." The women moved on, whispering furiously. Clara's heart thudded as she carried the bucket back toward the boarding house. She wasn't used to attention, especially not the jealous kind. And the more people whispered, the more frightened she became of anyone discovering the truth. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want favors she didn't earn. But she did want to know why Wyatt Hale was helping her, if indeed it was him. That question kept her awake that night, despite the blanket's warmth. A slip of the heart. The next evening, Clara walked toward the small church for the Christmas choir practice she attended every year. Snow fell gently, turning the streets into a soft, white dream. She wrapped the green blanket around her shoulders for warmth. The boots crunched softly beneath her feet. Lantern light flickered in the cold air. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with someone coming the other way. Wyatt Hale stood before her, snow dusting his hat and the shoulders of his coat. He looked down at her, and his breath caught almost imperceptibly. She was wearing both gifts. His eyes softened. "Good evening, Miss Winters." "Good evening, Mr. Hale," she replied, voice faint. He noticed the blanket draped around her. His gaze dropped briefly to the boots. Clara's cheeks flushed as she tugged the blanket tighter. He didn't comment on them, but something gentle flickered across his features, almost like pride. They stood facing each other in the quietest part of town, snow falling between them like blessing. Clara swallowed. I wanted to thank whoever left these. They've made the winter easier." "I'm glad to hear that. Yourself." Her pulse quickened. Do you know who left them?" A beat of silence. Wyatt exhaled softly, a puff of cold air escaping him. "I might have an idea." Clara's breath caught. His eyes held hers with a warmth she didn't expect from a man the town called cold. "But sometimes," he continued, voice low and steady, "it's best to let kindness remain quiet." Her heart fluttered. He stepped aside so she could pass. "Have a good evening, Miss Winters." "You too, Mr. Hale." She walked on, the warmth of his gaze lingering long after he disappeared into the snow. The third wish takes shape. 2 days later, Clara awoke before dawn to prepare the boarding house breakfast. The wind outside howled fiercely, rattling the window panes, promising a day colder than all the ones before it. As she knelt by the wood stove to stack kindling, Mrs. Calloway shuffled into the kitchen, her gray shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Clara, dear, a letter came for you." "For me?" "No return address, but it's on nice stationery." Mrs. Calloway handed her an envelope sealed with a small wax imprint of a pine tree. Clara's breath hitched. Hands trembling, she opened it. Inside was a note written in a firm but elegant hand. "Miss Winters, the church is holding a winter supper tonight for members of the community. Your name was added to the guest list. Please come. There will be warm food and good company. A gift from a friend."
There was no signature. But the pine tree wax seal, it looked hand-carved. Familiar. Clara knew only one man who would have such things custom-made. Wyatt Hale. Her heart fluttered painfully. It wasn't a meal at a restaurant. It wasn't extravagance. But it was still a warm meal, the third thing she asked for. She clutched the note to her chest, breathing in slowly. Why was he doing this? And how much more of her heart was she going to lose because of it? That evening, the church glowed with golden lanterns and wreaths of pines scattered along the porch. Clara hesitated before stepping inside, her boots crunching softly in the snow. The smell of roasted chicken, baked bread, and cinnamon filled the air. Her stomach tightened with hunger and gratitude. Every table was filled with townspeople talking, laughing, clinking cups of cider together. The pastor smiled when he saw her. "Clara, glad you made it." She offered a polite nod, then scanned the room. And her breath caught. Wyatt Hale stood near the far wall, speaking briefly with the pastor. He wore a dark coat, snow melting in droplets along the shoulders. His hat was tucked under one arm, revealing thick, dark hair. He looked softer here, less intimidating, almost lonely as he stood apart from the groups. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, and their eyes met. Heat rushed to Clara's cheeks. She quickly turned and hurried toward the buffet table. But a moment later, she felt someone step beside her. "You made it," Wyatt said gently. Clara looked up, startled. "Mr. Hale, I didn't expect to see you here." "I helped sponsor the supper," he said simply. "Everyone deserves one good Christmas meal." Her cheeks warmed. "That was very generous." "It's nothing," he replied, but his eyes held hers with a sincerity that contradicted his words. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unspoken. "Clara." She blinked, at the sound of her name on his lips. He rarely addressed anyone so familiarly. Wyatt cleared his throat lightly. "I'm glad you came." A tremor moved through her chest. She nodded. "I'm glad to." For the rest of the evening, they didn't stand together, but they noticed each other constantly. Clara felt his gaze brush her from across the room, warm and protective, without being possessive. And each time she dared peek at him, he looked away too quickly, as if caught caring too much. It was a kind of dance, silent, slow, and impossibly tender. Halfway through the night, she caught him watching her laugh with two older women. His eyes softened, almost painfully. He looked lonely, more lonely than a man of his wealth and power should ever look. Clara's heart whispered a truth she didn't want to admit. He wasn't cold. He wasn't greedy. He wasn't what the town believed. He was a man who had lost too much and given more than anyone realized, and hidden his kindness so deeply that only a miracle or a Christmas wish could reveal it. Gossip grows teeth. The next morning, the town was buzzing. Clara and Wyatt had not spoken closely enough to draw attention, but people noticed things anyway. At the Mercantile, while Clara selected a small bar of soap she'd been saving for, two women whispered near the shelf of winter spices. "I saw her talking to Wyatt Hale last night." One hissed. The other gasped. "Clara Winters? Impossible! He doesn't talk to anyone. And well, she's humble." "Exactly why it doesn't make sense." Clara's cheeks flamed. She kept her head down, wishing she could disappear between the sacks of flour. But the whispers followed her to the counter. "Greedy men don't change," the woman muttered loudly. "Mark my words." Clara swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she paid for the soap. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want drama. And she certainly didn't want Wyatt being judged for helping her. But people didn't understand him. They didn't see the way he looked at the world. Weary but hopeful, quiet but full of depth. Clara stepped back outside into the cold, letting the biting wind cool the heat on her face. Halfway down the boardwalk, footsteps crunched behind her. "Miss Winters?" She froze. Wyatt stood several feet away, his expression unreadable. "Is everything all right?" he asked. She nodded too quickly. "Yes, of course. The town likes to talk." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "About you." "And you," she admitted softly. Wyatt stepped closer, snow crunching beneath his boots. "What are they saying?" "That you're helping me. That you're changing." Wyatt exhaled sharply and shook his head. "I'm not changing. I've always been like this." Her heart tightened. "I know." He looked at me, then, really looked, and something unguarded flickered in his eyes. "You're one of the few who ever did," he said. The words slipped into her like warmth. Then Wyatt stepped back, reins tightening in his gloved hand. "I won't bring you trouble. I'll be more careful." Her heart dropped unexpectedly. She didn't want distance from him. "Please don't," she said, before she could stop herself. Wyatt's eyes widened just slightly. Clara flushed. "I mean, you don't have to avoid me. I don't mind." Wyatt stared at her for a long, breath-stealing moment. Then, he nodded once, slowly. "All right," he said quietly, "if that's what you want." Her heart fluttered. It was. A gown in the window. Winter deepened. Snow fell thicker, the wind sharpened, and Christmas drew closer with each passing day. One late afternoon, as Clara made her way back from work, she stopped dead in her tracks outside the tailor shop. Displayed in the window was a gown. Not a rich woman's gown, not a ball gown or anything extravagant, just a simple, beautiful winter dress. Deep burgundy with soft white lace at the cuffs. Modest, warm, perfect. And exactly the sort of gown she had written on her list. Her heart squeezed. Inside the shop, Wyatt Hale stood at the counter speaking with the tailor. Clara ducked back behind a post, stunned. Breath caught in her throat. She could hear the tailor's cheerful voice. "Yes, Mr. Hale, it'll be delivered on Christmas Eve just as you asked." Wyatt's deep voice responded quietly. She shouldn't go through winter without something warm to wear. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth. He wasn't just being kind. He noticed her. He watched over her. He cared. Whether he meant to or not, he was answering every wish she had entrusted to a silent tree. And somewhere along the way, he had become the miracle she needed. Her eyes warmed as she watched him turn toward the door. Clara stepped back quickly, hiding in the shadow of the building, and heart pounding like a drum. As Wyatt left the shop, she saw something she had never seen before. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. A smile full of quiet joy. A smile meant just for her, even if he didn't know she was watching. For the rest of the day, Clara struggled to steady her heartbeat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Wyatt standing inside the tailor shop, speaking softly, choosing a gown for her like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was answering her wishes, wish by wish, quietly, selflessly. And the truth settled into her chest like a soft, glowing ember. She was falling for him. She knew she shouldn't. He was wealthy. She was poor. The town would gossip mercilessly. And Wyatt Hale was a lonely, guarded man who kept his heart locked behind walls built from grief and misunderstanding. But after all he had done, after all the ways he had watched over her without asking for praise or gratitude or attention, how could she not have feelings for him? That night, she lay beneath the warm green blanket and whispered into the darkness. Why me? Wyatt? Why choose me? The snowstorm outside provided no answers, but her heart did. Because he saw me when no one else did. Because he cared when no one asked him to. Because he is lonely, and I understand loneliness better than anyone. She pressed a hand to her chest. She wasn't afraid of loving him. She was afraid he wouldn't allow himself to be loved.
Wyatt's burden. Back at the Hale Ranch, Wyatt paced the length of his dimly lit study. The fire cracked gently, casting a warm glow over the wood-paneled walls. Clara's Christmas list lay on his desk, smoothed and flattened from how often he ran his hand over it. He had never meant to take it. He had never meant to interfere in her life. He just couldn't help himself. Clara Winters was the kindest person he had met since his mother. She was someone who asked for nothing, yet deserved everything. And the more he watched her move through town with quiet grace and stubborn strength, the harder it became to stay away. He picked up the list again. The gown would arrive soon. The meal had already been given. The boots and blanket were being worn. Her wishes were nearly complete. Yet he still felt hollow. "Why does helping her matter this much to me?" he murmured. He knew the answer. Because he didn't want to spend another Christmas alone in the big, silent house where his mother once baked pies and hummed old folk songs. Because every winter since her passing had felt colder than the last. Because when Clara smiled, even politely, it chipped away at the loneliness that had hardened inside him. He pressed his hand to his chest. He had money, he had land, he had everything the world valued, but none of it meant a thing without someone to share it with. And the only person he wanted near was the girl whose list he held in his hands. He whispered her name into the quiet. Snowstorm on Whisper Ridge. 3 days before Christmas, the temperature dropped sharply. A storm swept in from the mountains, covering Copper Bend in thick, blinding snow. The wind howled fiercely, rattling doors and windows. Clara finished her chores early and wrapped the green blanket around her shoulders before stepping outside the boarding house. She needed to fetch more firewood before the night turned even colder. But the moment she reached the edge of town, she realized how dangerous the wind had become. Snow swirled violently, stinging her cheeks and stealing her breath. Still, she pressed on. The firewood was only a 10-minute walk away. She could manage it. She always did. But halfway there, the wind grew stronger. Snow whirled in frantic circles. Her vision blurred. She stumbled, leaning against a tree to brace herself. Then she heard hoofpats. Slow, steady, purposeful. She turned just as a tall figure on horseback emerged through the white curtain of snow. Wyatt Hale. He dismounted in one swift movement and approached her, snow clinging to his coat. "Clara, what are you doing out here?" "Firewood," she managed, embarrassed. "I thought I had time before the storm worsened." He shook his head firmly. "You shouldn't be out here alone, not in this weather." "I didn't realize." "I know." His voice softened. "But I did." Before she could respond, his gloved hand closed gently around her arm.
steadying her as the wind nearly knocked her sideways. "You're freezing," he murmured. She tried to protest, but another gust of wind nearly pulled her from her feet. Wyatt mapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward his horse. "No arguments," he said. "You're coming with me." "To the boarding house?" she asked, shivering. He hesitated. "No," he said softly. "The storm's getting worse. You won't be safe in town tonight. My ranch is closer." Clara froze. Go with him? Alone? His eyes met hers. Steady, protective, sincere. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said quietly. Something warm and fragile fluttered in her chest. She nodded. And Wyatt lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing at all.
Shelter at the Hale Ranch. The Hale Ranch house glowed with warm light as Wyatt guided his horse through the storm and up the long drive. Clara clung to him, her fingers gripping his coat, her cheek pressed against his back. He could feel her trembling from the cold. When they reached the porch, Wyatt lifted her down with gentle hands. "Let's get you inside," he murmured. He opened the front door, and a wave of warmth and pine-scented air washed over them. Inside, the fire crackled bright in the hearth. Lamps glowed softly. The house was quiet, but comforting. Clara stepped inside timidly. She had never been in a home so large, and certainly not Wyatt Hale's private home. She had imagined it cold and empty, but it was warm. Lived in. Lonely but cared for. Wyatt shrugged off his coat and took hers, hanging them near the fire. "You're shivering," he said, voice full of concern. "Come sit." She settled by the hearth, and he draped a blanket around her shoulders. Not the green one, but another made of thick fleece. As the warmth seeped into her bones, she looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered. Wyatt sat beside her, though not too close. "You don't need to thank me." "I do," she insisted softly. "You saved me." He shook his head. "I just couldn't bear the thought of you out there alone." Their eyes met, and for the first time, neither looked away. Snow roared outside, but inside, something tender settled between them. Something quiet and real. Clara swallowed. "Why are you so kind to me?" Wyatt's jaw tightened, his throat working as if he didn't know how to answer. At last he said, barely audible, "Because you're the only person who ever made my mother smile at the end. Because you look at people the way no one looks at me. Because you make this house feel less empty just by standing in it." Clara's breath caught. Wyatt stared into the fire, his voice low. "And because I care about you more than I should." Her heart trembled. The truth sat heavy and warm between them, glowing like the fire that crackled just inches away. The fire crackled steadily as the storm howled outside, shaking the shutters. Clara sat wrapped in the fleece blanket, warmth spreading slowly through her chilled limbs. Wyatt still sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to sense his nervous energy, but far enough away to respect her space. Wyatt Hale, Copperbend's so-called cold, greedy, heartless rancher, looked nothing like the man the town whispered about. Not in the soft way he watched the fire instead of her, not in the tremble of his fingers resting on his knee, not in the way his voice had cracked slightly when he told her he cared. Clara swallowed, trying to gather the courage to speak. "Wyatt," she whispered. His head lifted immediately, eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "Yes." She hesitated, suddenly unsure. How did one ask why they'd been chosen for kindness? How did one ask a man why he had given more care and thought than anyone else in her life? "Earlier," she began softly, "you said you care about me more than you should."
He stiffened slightly, jaw tightening as if preparing for rejection. I shouldn't have said that. You were cold and frightened. It wasn't fair of me. Yes, it was, she whispered. It was honest. His eyes widened, breath catching. Clara drew in a shaky breath. Why do you think it's wrong to care about me? Wyatt's expression shifted, uncertainty, longing, fear, all in a single heartbeat. Because I'm no good with people, he admitted quietly. The town thinks I'm cold, harsh, greedy, and maybe they're not wrong. I don't know how to talk the way men do. I don't know how to be charming or easy or... His voice trailed off. Gentle, she supplied, but gently herself. Wyatt let out a short, humorless breath. Gentle, yes. I don't think I've been gentle a day in my life, except maybe with you. Her heart trembled. You've been nothing but gentle with me. He looked away, embarrassed. I'm trying. For you, I'm trying. The confession hit her like a warm wave. Before she could respond, Wyatt rose abruptly, moving toward the mantelpiece as if he needed distance to keep his composure. I'm sorry. I shouldn't talk like this. I don't want you feeling pressured or... Wyatt. He froze at the sound of his name, spoken softly, lovingly. Clara rose from her seat and stepped toward him. Snow pressed against the window panes. The fire made warm shadows dance across the room. Wyatt, she repeated, her voice steadier this time. I'm not frightened of you, and I don't feel pressured. He turned slowly. His eyes searched hers, cautious and hopeful, like a man waiting for the world to fall apart or fall together. Clara, he whispered, but she wasn't ready to say what her heart screamed, not yet. There was something else she needed to know first. Wyatt, she said, softly, my Christmas list. You found it, didn't you? His expression shifted instantly. Guilt, vulnerability, and something raw. He exhaled shakily. Yes. Her pulse quickened. And you granted the wishes. I did. Why? Because you asked for so little, and because giving you warmth felt like giving myself purpose again. That was it. The moment Clara Winters realized she wasn't falling in love with him, she already had. Christmas Eve's last wish. The storm raged through the night. Wyatt brought Clara a bowl of warm stew. She insisted on helping with the dishes afterward. When she stood at his kitchen sink, scrubbing gently, Wyatt leaned against the doorframe, watching her with something like awe. He'd imagined someone standing there for years, someone who could make this silent house feel alive again. He never thought that someone would be Clara Winters. Later, they returned to the fire. Clara sat on the rug, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Wyatt stayed in his chair for a long time before speaking. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Clara looked up, brows knitting softly. Wyatt rose and walked to a drawer beside the fireplace. He retrieved a small wrapped package and approached her. This is the last thing on your list, he said. Her throat tightened. The gown? She whispered. He nodded. But it wasn't supposed to arrive until Christmas Eve, she whispered. He hesitated, voice low. It did. She stared up at him. He set the package in her hands and stepped back, giving her space to open it. Clara unwrapped it slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might vanish. When the cloth spilled out into her hands, her breath left her. The burgundy gown, the delicate lace, the warm winter fabric that would hug her curves gently without being scandalous. It was perfect. Tears welled in her eyes. Wyatt, it's beautiful. It's modest, warm, made to last. I thought you might like it. I love it, she whispered, voicing the truth. Wyatt's breath stuttered slightly. Seeing her touched him deeply, more deeply than any praise he had ever received for business or land or cattle. But Clara wasn't looking at the gown anymore. She was looking at him. "Wyatt," she said softly, "I've never had someone care for me like this." He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure I'm doing it right." "You are," she whispered. "More right than anyone ever has." Her words were soft as snowfall. Wyatt swallowed. "Clara, I didn't give you these things because you're poor or because you needed them. I gave them because you're the first person I've wanted to look after in a long time." Emotion flooded her chest. "Do you want to look after me?" she asked gently. "Or do you want me?" The question hung in the air between them, fragile and trembling. Wyatt's breath faltered. He knelt before her, not even realizing he'd dropped to his knees until her eyes widened slightly. "I want you," he admitted, his voice breaking with raw truth. "I want your smile in this house. I want your warmth in these winters. I want you beside me. Not because I'm lonely, but because I—" He stopped himself, breath shaking. Clara reached out and touched his cheek. Warmth shot through him like lightning. "Wyatt, I want you too," she said softly. He closed his eyes as if letting the truth sink into the deepest part of him. Their faces were inches apart. The fire crackled softly, the storm rattled the windows. The house, usually so silent and sorrow-filled, felt alive with the warmth of possibility. Wyatt opened his eyes. Clara's hand rested gently against his cheek. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull back. She didn't. Their lips brushed softly. A breath? A heartbeat? A miracle. It wasn't a wild kiss, nor a desperate one. It was tender, careful, reverent, as though each of them knew the other's heart was fragile and had to be held gently. Clara's fingers curled slightly against his cheek. Wyatt's hand rose to cradle the back of her head, his touch steady and warm. When they finally parted, their foreheads touched lightly. Wyatt exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," she whispered. He lifted his head, eyes searching hers. "I've wanted that for longer than you know." Something inside him unraveled completely. Wyatt Hale, Copper Bend's loneliest man, felt whole for the first time in years. Wyatt built up the fire, while Clara slipped into the guest room to change into the gown. She hesitated before looking into the mirror. She had never worn anything so beautiful. The burgundy fabric brought warmth to her skin. The lace traced the curves of her collarbone delicately. She looked like someone who belonged in a warm, loving home. Someone Wyatt might truly want. Gathering her courage, she stepped back into the main room. Wyatt looked up, and his breath caught audibly. "Clara." He said her name like a prayer. She approached shyly, the hem of the gown brushing the floor. "Do you like it?" He laughed softly, shocked, reverent. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Her cheeks flushed deeply. Wyatt stepped closer, but not too close. He still left her the choice. Clara closed that distance herself. She laid her head lightly against his chest, Wyatt's arms wrapped around her, slow and hesitant at first, then firm and warm when she didn't pull away. They stood in front of the fire, holding each other, while the storm raged around them, but couldn't touch the warmth they shared. For Wyatt, it was the first Christmas Eve in years where the house didn't echo with emptiness. For Clara, it was the first time she felt truly wanted. truly safe, truly seen. And for both, it was the beginning of something they'd spent their whole lives longing for. Christmas morning. When Clara woke the next morning, the storm had quieted. Light streamed softly through the frosted windows, painting the room in pale gold. She lay beneath the warm blankets for a moment, listening. For the first time in years, she didn't feel cold, or alone, or invisible. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of someone moving in the kitchen. Wyatt. She rose, slipped on the robe he had left for her, and padded down the short hallway. The smell of coffee and something sweet, cinnamon perhaps, filled the air. Wyatt stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, hair still tousled from sleep. He looked up the moment she entered. "Morning," he said softly, a small smile warming his face. Clara felt her cheeks flush. "Morning. You sleep all right?" he asked. "I slept better than I have in years," she admitted. His shoulders relaxed, as if her words eased something in him. "I made cinnamon biscuits. They're not perfect, but I wanted you to have something warm on Christmas." She laughed softly, touched to her core. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." He paused. "But I wanted to." Wyatt wasn't a man accustomed to wanting things for himself, not since his mother died. Yet he wanted this, a quiet Christmas morning with her in his home. She joined him at the small table. Outside, the world lay blanketed in white. Inside, their breaths mingled in soft laughter and shy conversation, both of them aware of the newness between them, delicate, precious. After they finished eating, Wyatt reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Clara," he said, voice low and earnest, "you can stay as long as you need. Through the winter. Or longer, if you'll have me." Her breath caught. "Wyatt." He shook his head gently. "You don't have to decide anything today. I know your life is in town. I know you're used to working and living on your own. But this house has room. My life has room. And He hesitated, the words heavy in his throat. Wyatt Hale had given her boots and a blanket and a gown, but this was the most vulnerable gift of all. "I don't want to go back to being alone," he whispered. Clara squeezed his hand, her heart too full for words. By noon, the snow had stopped, leaving the ranch blanketed in glistening white. Clara and Wyatt stepped outside, both bundled warmly, the cold air nipping at their flushed cheeks. The world was quiet, peaceful, holy in its stillness. Clara looked out across the fields and felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. The sky stretched vast above them, endless and pure, like the world was brand new. Wyatt stood beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. "This land feels different today," he murmured. "It feels like Christmas," Clara whispered. He exhaled softly, watching her face instead of the horizon. "You know, when I found your list under the whisper tree, I thought it might have been fate." "Fate?" she asked, gently. Wyatt nodded. "I went out that night to clear my head. I wasn't looking for anything. But your letter, Clara, it felt like the world put it in my hands because I needed it. Because I needed you." Emotion rose in Clara's chest, warm and bright. "I never expected anyone to find that note. I was just desperate. I needed hope." "You gave me hope. I wanted to grant those wishes because it made me feel alive again, useful, connected, like I wasn't just surviving winter anymore." Clara blinked away tears, her heart trembling with love. "You gave me more than wishes, Wyatt. You gave me kindness, safety, a reason to believe in miracles again." His breath hitched. Clara stepped closer, her gloved hands lifting to rest against his chest. "And you gave me yourself." Wyatt closed his eyes, as if her touch healed a wound years in the making. He opened them slowly, cupping her face gently. "Clara, I don't ever want another Christmas without you." She smiled, tears bright. "You won't." He leaned in, their foreheads touching as the world held its breath. "Funny thing about Christmas, people talk about miracles all the time, but I never expected to find one." Clara's voice trembled with softness. "Neither did I." Snowflakes began to fall again, soft, sparkling, delicate, like heaven blessing the promise between them. Wyatt drew her into his arms, and Clara melted into the warmth she had been waiting her whole life to find. Two souls who had walked through long winters alone, now wrapped together in a miracle neither had dared to hope for. The richest man in Copperbend, once lonely and misunderstood. The hard-working girl who asked Santa for simple warmth. Together, on Christmas Day, they found something far greater than gifts. They found each other, and that was the truest miracle of all. The end.